this is the first episode of Pilot Initiation. This is going to be a show where we talk about written series or productions that we work on. And basically, what we're going to do is we'll have somebody ask questions to see how far into development we can get and try to improve on development on where we are. The way this will work is I'm Shea Baker, this is co-host Solomon Page, and he will be asking me questions to further develop each chapter of the book. So, what are your first questions? Well, let me back up a little bit. So, the book I'm currently working on is Lovia's Resonance. It's sort of a cyberpunk sci-fi style, and basically the themes I want to work on the most are horror, romance, and science fiction. Alright, what questions could you have for that?
Out of the three, what would be your starting theme?
Horror. Horror is definitely going to be my starting theme on this because when I first thought it up in development, I wanted to go with romance first, but then I realized I'm not much of a romance content creator. So my best strong points are horror aspects. So that's what I'm going to try to focus on the most with like carnage type themes. So if nothing else, look forward to like very graphic written scenes in this book.
Okay. And what will your starting point be? Will it be like an introduction to the characters or just a synopsis of the world?
Okay, so that's a good question because I've already got chapter 1 written down. So my starting point was character introduction and world building aspects. So there's a lineup of 5 characters to start out with, but the 2 main characters are going to be William Caliber and Lyra Copier. Those are going to be the 2 main characters that it follows, but there's 3 other side characters within those 2 that it follows too. But on the topic of world building, it's kind of a cyberpunk style, futuristic, distant planet world. I don't want this to be centered on Earth. I want it to have a lot more world building aspects than what we have here. So that's going to be like high tech science fiction that you see in the book.
And could you go into like some details about what we should expect for the first chapter?
The first chapter is just more of an introduction, so you shouldn't expect anything like super heavy in plot other than character introduction and world building. The first chapter was specifically made to just introduce the characters, so you'll see all of the characters within the first chapter. The second chapter, however, is already in development, and that's where you see a little more rising action happen. That's where it kind of goes further into the conflict that you see. And what I plan to make as the main conflict in this story is a small scale alien invasion. That's where the horror aspects come in. Because these aren't going to be the typical alien that you see in most common horror films. This is going to be a new style of alien to where like almost symbiote like from Marvel Comics, but they don't take over the entire body. They just control it from a different area, if that makes sense.
And will we learn more about that in like the third chapter or just kind of just it keeps going?
Okay, so how I plan to end chapter 2, that's you'll definitely see no, you won't see them at all. You're just gonna know something is there and something is on its move. But in chapter 3, we'll definitely get a glimpse into what could it possibly be that is doing this small scale invasion. So yeah, in chapter 3, that's when I'm going to get a little more into detail about what they look like, how they move, how they control people, what they actually are here for. So that's where we're going to see a little more of it. That's a good question.
All right. And outside of the main plot, want to talk more about the world, the class systems, citizens, all that?
Okay, that's a great question. So the world is very inspired on the cyberpunk style. I took a lot of inspiration from the game Cyberpunk 2077, and I wanted it to kind of be like that in the futuristic style, but a little more advanced. So the technology that you see in this world is like far beyond what we have. So like things in chapter one that you'll see is that they basically have a hollow screen that they can pull up anywhere, even in the worst of situations, to send out messages and basically communicate with other people. Or even, it's basically like their cell phones, but it's a far more advanced version for them because they don't have to carry it anywhere. You do get a glimpse into more of their technology a little bit into chapter two because one thing that I really highlight is the traveling technology. That's something that you hear about in chapter one, but you actually see used in chapter two, but it's quickly destroyed by basically what is bound to happen. So it's basically their technology versus somebody else a little more advanced technology, and that's when we get more of a glimpse into how well their technology is in this world. And with the citizens, they're all unified, and that's something I really want to highlight in this world building too. Is that they don't have much conflict with based on region and based on ethnic groups, but they still do have criminal conflict. It's more of an internal struggle rather than racial power or rather than social status. It's more of like all crime syndicates that actually make the issues, all calculated crime that is happening rather than mindless, basic, indirect crime. That's one aspect I would really like to highlight in future chapters.
And as far as it being somewhat inspired by cyberpunk, does it share that type of humor, or should we more or less just expect the technological aspects?
That is a good question. Like, you might have just altered how I make it a little more because, like, Cyberpunk's inspiration should go a little more than just the world building because their story building is very good to me, and I don't think I can compare to the actual Cyberpunk game with the world building, or not the world building, the story building, because excuse me, that game takes so many turns in story building, and the themes that I'm focused on are kind of one sided. So I would love to try to incorporate some of their like humor and like character aspects, but the way my story is built, it doesn't have enough room for it in a way because like there's parts where you can basically try to slide it in, but I don't think it would work out with horror being the best aspect of this book. However, I could still try to do that. That's a good question.
Just as long as it wouldn't disrupt the flow.
Yeah, that's another thing. I want this story to flow like very very smoothly. So I'm not trying to like have major plot holes or like plot armor to characters. I want to see like a lot of things bring them to close to death, but within reasonable means, if not actually kill some of them off. So you'll be expecting a lot of like turns for the worst to like, oh crap, what can actually happen to these characters within a matter of seconds.
So pretty chaotic.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be chaotic for the most part. You'll see a lot of that going down south very fast in chapter two, actually. So once that's done in production, be prepared to like go into chapter one and go into chapter two not expecting anything.
And as far as your process for writing, do you think you're just going as you go, or did you start with an end in mind?
Okay, that's a great question too. So I used to write like that a lot, but more in recent writing, I started making a start point and making an end point, and then I try to think of what can possibly happen in between to get to these 2 points. So that's how I started chapter 2 actually, because I know how I ended chapter 1 and I know how I wanted chapter 2 to end. So that's where I started on that. But it ended up being a lot more than I anticipated, because even though I had those 2 points figured out, there was a lot more that happened while I was writing to make me like just keep going a little bit more and like stretching out the process to where it's not a small chapter, but it's a decent sized chapter to where you want to keep reading.
And then, like, do you feel you will get everything conveyed through this one book alone?
Man, that is a good question.
Oh wait, let me rephrase.
I get what you're saying. You're trying to say, will it all conclude with this one book? I definitely did start with a trilogy in mind, but I'm not sure if I can see that through. So I may end up just concluding it on this one book.
And do you think with just this one book you could generate like side books? It's not the term.
Spinoffs.
Spinoffs, yeah.
The way I'm writing things, definitely not. Definitely not. That's
it's gonna be a dark.
Oh yeah, it's gonna be horrible. Like, I'm not trying to keep the readers like thinking it's
positive.
No, it's not positive at all. It's definitely gonna be some very disgusting scenes that I write out, and I want them to think like, man, that has got to be a horrible scene to actually see on drawing or screen. Like, it's gonna be so like distorted that it makes them want to wonder like, how did they write that? So yeah, that's a great question. Actually, I don't see any spin-offs coming from anything I write from this one.
And so would you like to see it get adapted into anything else, like possibly?
I feel like me and you actually could work on something like that, adapting it into like some 2D shorts or like even like a comic a little bit here and there. But this one specifically, I don't want to be adapted as much as I think of other projects. We'll come up on that in other episodes once this book is completed. But as far as Lovia's Resonance as a project, I don't want it to be adapted as much. But if for some reason it blows up and somebody requests to make it like a TV series or a movie, I'd definitely be on board with that. Because this is one that I'd love to see as a live action rather than animation, because of the horror aspect. I strongly believe there's like things that animation can do better than live action, but when it comes to horror, live action is like the only place for it.
And do you think you have a favorite character picked out just now?
Oh man, that's crazy. Like, I ain't even learned these characters yet. I know what they are, I know who they are, and that's a great question, because like the way I was planning to write it, I think the main character 2 or 1, however you look at it, is Lyra Covier. I think she'll be my favorite because she's a very shut off person, but she doesn't fold under the pressure that they'll be under as a whole unit. So when it comes to her character specifically, I feel like she would be my favorite to write out, and it's going to be a fun one to write out a lot of her scenes, because I think some of them are just going to be off the wall. I might include some of that humor aspect that you brought up with her character specifically to try to like lighten the intensity of it.
And do you feel like out of these characters that we should focus on one more or the other, or just an equal amount?
Ooh. Okay, so the way it's written, the main character it actually follows is William Caliber. So you're seeing a lot of the book from his perspective, not as first person but third person. So it's written basically following him. So you'll see more of him rather than anybody, but I am trying to focus on other people as well. So, like, one book that we both read, The Scythe.
Scythe.
Yeah, like how they flip back and forth between characters' perspectives. I wanted to do something like that, but I don't think I will. Specifically to keep other characters like kind of mysterious on the read, because that's where I can a little more incorporate that romance aspect to where like from his perspective you can't really get a read on other characters, but from their perspective it can be like as blunt as possible or as like humorous as possible as you can probably find it.
And for the traits of William, have you got far into him yet?
Oh man, not far enough. You catch me off guard with his character questions, man. So I kind of have a starting point for his character. So I definitely want his character to be kind of like closed off, shy, but always willing to help out. Like I tend to have a bad habit of focusing on character strengths first and not focusing on weaknesses. But as I write, their weaknesses kind of show. So what's probably going to happen is we don't see a lot of his strengths first with this character being that he's closed off. But as the story progresses, he becomes a much more stronger character rather than the person he started off as, given the situations that they'll be in. So I feel like he's a good starting point to try to flip around my process rather than start off with a strong character and then expose their weaknesses. Yeah, I feel like that'd be a good way to try to break out of that habit is with his character specifically.
I feel like either way you flop it though, like if you start a character with weak points, you can create the strong points more fluently.
That's a good point too, because like when I started this one, I kind of introduced the characters enough to where you can't really see anything about them just yet. Like you just know who they are. This kind of starts in like military style format, so the characters are all introduced as at least sergeants in their armed forces, and with their planet is all one unified army, and their main mission is to defend against any possible invasion and to try to explore outer planets. And that's part of like their main technology is the in the story it's called streamers. Basically it's a type of starship that is capable of deep space travel, however it's not capable of planetary travel yet. So that's one of the things that you see that I was talking about in technology. And in the military format, back to that, all these characters that you see, the five that are introduced at first, they're all within the ranking of sergeant at least. However, William Caliber, he has at the lowest sergeant, and basically he's just told what to do the entire time. But whenever it comes to like overall development of the team, I feel like his character is gonna have the most of it. So when it comes to like seeing other people, they're already well developed characters from his perspective at least, because that's how the story's gonna follow. So from William's perspective, all these other characters are a little more developed than him, so he has to actually bring out the best of himself in this story within the chapters, because his character is probably going to start the most closed off, and he actually has to kind of learn about himself through the oncoming chapters. And while these other people, they've already been in situations similar or have had something happen to them where they're a little more developed and they're a little less folding under pressure. So that's going to be a big part of his character development, is like seeing how they react to situations
versus how he's doing it currently.
Yeah.
I'll throw you a curveball. What about stuff such as food? How have they advanced food-wise and stuff like that?
Whoa. Okay. That's man.
Just to give you a little idea, Spinner.
Okay, that's actually a very vital question I need, because the way chapter 2 happens, food is gonna be an actual major issue. Um, so man, I haven't even thought about that yet. Actually, wow. So I want to say it starts similar to Earth with like farming and agriculture with animals and plant life. However, their animals and plant life are different from Earth because they are a different planet, Lovia. So I feel like there are certain animal types and plant life and agriculture entirely. I feel like that can affect the story in a major way that you just made me think of that I did not think about too heavily on. But now that you've brought it up, I'll definitely try to incorporate that somehow.
Yeah, I don't want to throw you too off course with it. I'm just thinking stuff like, the vitals to what we
Yeah, I
value.
definitely understand. Like, the world building is a major aspect that I want to focus on, and that's like one major aspect of world building that I basically just did not think of entirely. So I really needed that question actually. Like, um, the way chapter two takes place is you're gonna see some of the oceans that the planet has, and you'll learn that one of them is like very dangerous. So that's like as far as like animal life that I've gotten because their sea life is gonna be highly predatorial. So that's one thing that I needed to incorporate in chapter two or chapter three. But thinking about like all the other animal life and fauna and whatever the other word was, all that life on the planet other than just the people is an aspect that I basically overstep, but it's a necessary aspect when it comes to the world building. So I'll definitely think harder on that because the animals definitely need to be like alien like, and the plant life does need to be the same way. So I'll definitely think really hard on that one because I want this story to be like very vivid when it comes to its entirety on the world building specifically.
And to draw you back into the characters, will values such as family and all that, will that come into play?
Ooh, that's a good question. Values, it depends because some characters hold different values. Like some of them are like at a point in their life where they just don't hold anything valuable. Um, you'll definitely see some character values be brought up, but not too many, I'll say. But I'll definitely try to incorporate like their moral standing. Definitely, because all of these characters that you see within the first two chapters, they're all within the same ranking. So you definitely see them at the same moral status. But like we talked about earlier, where like crime is an actual issue still on this planet of unity, we'll see like different moral codes of people that'll try to like get in the way of the missions or like see. I'll try to incorporate some type of like communication intelligence into the alien life that comes to this planet and tries their small scale invasion to try to give them a moral standing as well because it would be kind of lame to just have an invasion but without reason
Yeah.
because there's no point in that, especially if like they can do it easily. Like that'd just be a lame plot. So I'll try to incorporate some type of intelligence to where they can communicate with it and also understand why it's here.
And following that last comment on that one, do you think with this opposing force that there may be some that sort of sympathize with what they're going against? Or,
Oh, man.
like, kind of like, if I were to give an example, like Arbiter in Halo 3.
Yeah, man, that is a great question. So the way I'm setting up the conflict, being that it's a small scale invasion, you only see the hostile invaders. So with the sense that you're talking about, I don't think we'll be able to
Convey that.
yeah, because being that it'll be
Small scale.
yeah, like in terms of that, it took a while for them to come to a sympathy with the Covenant and Halo series. But meanwhile, this all we're gonna see is the havoc that they wreak without any intelligence onto the matter until later in the book. So that was a great question. However, I don't think it'll happen.
It's okay. Just a little thought.
Yeah, that great thought even. All right, it looks like we got time for a few more questions.
All right. So, what is your current objective with the book?
Man, you are really throwing me off today. So, I would say a current objective is adversity and knowing how to face it, because the conflict is basically going to be a threat that can basically take over this whole planet, but because of a few soldiers that manage to step up and get in the way of that, it can be overcome because they basically had the spirit to not be dominated by somebody else. That's one topic highlight that I want to throw in there is indomitable spirit of just anyone. So like just the objective goal is just the thought of not giving up. That's basically what I try to convey in a lot of the work I do is the idea of never giving in to weakness, because we all have weakness, and giving into it is just going to slow you down on any goal that you're trying to reach.
I really like that process for this because this will give a lot of people relatability to the book. Just having that keep going, no matter the obstacle type.
Yeah, and like the problem with that is like we watch a lot of anime, so like the conflicts are like off the wall a lot of the time. So like it's gonna be like some alien guy that pretty much can destroy the planet if he wants to, and like there's this one guy that stands in his way. I'm not gonna be that unrealistic.
And make that one guy beat the whole army.
Yeah, I'm not gonna beat that. I'm not gonna do that in this series. I'm gonna be way realistic. It's gonna take like the entire planet to come together for this issue, because realistically, with the alien species that I'll be diving into a little more in the next episode, they definitely have to unify as an entire planet to solve this problem. And that's something I want to also highlight as well. Like, not every issue you face is on your own. Because, like, even though it doesn't matter how small of a friend group you have, how small of a team you have, if you communicate and network properly, you can get a lot done within a matter of days. And that's one aspect I want to highlight is the teamwork that is pulled off in this series, because it's going to branch off from just these more than 5 characters. It's also going to like expand into other parts of the world, like other parts in cities, to where like they have to network with people in order to get certain objectives done. So that's one aspect I would really love to highlight is communication and teamwork.
And with this high-tech stuff, like weaponry, would you say, with the cyberpunk type theme, would you say it's more, how would I say, more derivative to territory or kind of just defensive?
That's a great question. So these people are unified, right? But when it comes to weapons, they're kind of like free to anybody that has the money, kind of like how the U.S. is. But the weapons were specifically made for defense. But when it comes to like the crime syndicates that I want to get invested in, they'll also have their own supply of weapons. But these weapons were specifically designed for planetary defense. And when it comes to like the high techness of them, they're going to be like at an insane destructive level. So you quickly realize that these weapons are highly dangerous and they should not be in the hands of citizens. But at the same time, it's basically their citizens' right.
Right, to have that.
Yeah. Like, you're gonna see that it's very dangerous for the power of these weapons, because that's something I want to highlight as well, as like how powerful these weapons are and why they were specifically designed for planetary defense. So you'll see a lot of the destruction that these weapons can cause. But that was a great question.
And then back to the crime syndicate. If we have crime that goes on within this, would you also say that there would be like uh enclosement to keep these people a prison if you must?
Ooh,
Or would it be more like a if you do this so much we'll just kill you type?
that is an insane question.
I just kind of felt the need to ask.
Yeah, you should have, because that's world building that I'm not thinking of, and thank you for putting that on my mind, because like, man. So I guess with their advanced intelligence, I feel like it would be a more humane process, like imprisonment to like a certain extent, kind of how humans do it, but on a realistic scale. Because like, if we get down to it, some crimes are unjust and some others are justified. So like, I'd say they would have a better justice system than our world.
Since the unification would be
Yeah,
more.
like that's a big thing with it. Their unification is a lot of investment in their world, and the crime against it is sometimes justified, sometimes isn't. Like the crime syndicate groups, their crimes are definitely unjust and made for exploitation. So I feel like the imprisonment would be for them specifically, and like to certain extents, execution would take place. But when it comes to like self defense and like basically doing what you need to do to keep yourself alive in terms of like crimes against you, or like basically petty crimes almost, like I want to highlight the self defense in a matter. So like that wouldn't be um what's the word I'm looking for, like crime against you, so you wouldn't be trialed for that. However, when it comes to like petty crimes like theft or like abuse, you would definitely be on trial for that, and you would have your stay in their enclosures to where you would be trialed for your crimes. But with organized crime, it would definitely be a more heavier trial for them, because it's harder to get certain supplies in this world, like the weapons, because the weapons would be expensive, but still able to get to citizens in a way. It would be different weapons from their military, but it would still be dangerous weapons because of their technology. So it'd be more like on a cyberpunk level for them rather than the planetary defense weapons for their military.
And then, following back on the prison note, do you think with this advanced system that they could have like time dilution software for these, hypothetically?
Like, elaborate on that a little more.
Like, you could have prison sentences, but to the mind of the person, it could be years, decades even, but in real time, it would be like...
That's great, actually. Like, that's not something I thought of. That's a great idea for their advanced technology. I don't think it would be too heavy to develop that into the story, but it could be a good aspect to just throw in there. That actually might be useful later in the plot somehow, but I feel like I'll keep that on mind, because that would be an interesting like little thing to throw in there. All right, this is gonna be our last question for chapter 1.
Ooh, chapter 1.
Yeah.
1. Okay. For chapter 1, it would be the context of a mission that we're on, right?
Yes.
And so, what details would you be able to say about this mission?
Okay, so that's all explored in chapter 1. Actually, it's a very direct tasks that are given. Basically, it's the hollow screen that pops up that I told you about. Basically, their cell phone for this world. So they get basically an email message to the 5 recipients that turn into the group that the story follows. And it starts from the perspective of William Caliber, and he reads the message, and it's very direct. It says there has been a object detected in our orbit, and it needs to be investigated or attempted communication with it if it seems sentient. So they go to a meeting room and they talk to a higher sergeant than all of them, and she basically runs down the whole mission. And from that point, you basically get a summary of each character that is going to be included in these first chapters. And from that point on, it basically progresses into chapter two, because all this chapter is basically what's the starting point, a little bit of the world building, a little bit of character details, and where is this next chapter going to go. So it was very brief for the first chapter, but with chapter two, it's going to get very intense very fast. So don't expect too much from chapter one. However, chapter two is where it's going to keep you hooked, hopefully. But I want it to be a very fast-paced book. I don't want it to just have plot holes all over the place.
That
but
can drag.
yeah, I do want it to be a fast-paced book though, because I don't want it to have like 1,000 chapters, but I do want it to have like at least 10 maybe max. But I feel like it could be a little faster than that. So I'm gonna try to keep the plot fast-paced. So that's a good thing, a good start with chapter one. Chapter two is going to be a little bit faster with all the rising action and everything. However, it will like pretty much come to a fall real quick on chapter two. Alright, I guess that wraps up the show for today. I'm Shea Baker, this is Solomon Page, and we'll be back next week about a discussion of chapter two and its production process. Thank you.